Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Well, the other question raised by the president's speech today is whether President Obama intends to take over hundreds of billions of dollars from the TARP credit line and use it without congressional approval for whatever he sees fit. Our next guest may have a thing or two to say about that. He's Congressman Brian Bilbray, Republican from California. So did this come as a shock to you when you heard it?
Well, not a total shock, just because you got to understand that the president's people are coming from the position that there's never enough money spent by Washington. And I have a feeling they forget the fact that there was a commitment made that whatever money was saved or returned from TARP would go into paying off the deficit that was created by the TARP.
Well, it's not like there is a pile of cash around that they can dip into and say, okay, this is the TARP cash. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the whole TARP thing was a line of credit to be used if necessary.
Well, and it was. And the trouble is, what we're talking about now is actually there was a line of committed funds that still wasn't used the way it originally was promised to be made by the previous administration, and now all at once this administration's looking to use this as some kind of abstract slush fund for a new proposal. So it is very frustrating for a lot of people that say this shows you that there is no end to a government program once it's created, even one that supposedly is a money in, money out program.
Well, what I love is the magical accounting where somehow lower than expected loss in part creates additional resources. I mean, that's a kind of accounting you haven't heard since Enron.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, people went to jail in the private sector for running this kind of accounting. And you got to remember, this is all being done under the shadow of the announcement this morning that in 2013 we could lose our triple rating as a nation, that we could be paying huge amounts of increased interest on the debt. So this is one of those things that we've got to keep an eye on while those of us in Washington, and especially the White House, is making a lot of new promises without ever knowing how they're going to pay for it.
Now, of course, the other thing about it is the law about TARP, it says that TARP's lending and purchasing authority is going to expire on December 31st. That's only a couple of weeks from now, and yet the president said we are going to wind down TARP. That seems to be a mixed message. It's already winding down, or it's supposed to, in 2 weeks. Do you think he's actually planning to extend it beyond that December 31st deadline?
I think absolutely. I think you read into his words exactly the signal he's sending, and that is, again, once you create a program, it never sunsets. You always find an excuse to continue it. So, because you got to remember, people come to Washington normally, a great percentage of people come to Washington to consolidate power under them, and that means have Washington control this capital rather than allow it to be working in the private sector where our founding fathers thought it was supposed to be done. And once you create this program, there's always an excuse to extend it a little farther, a little longer. And that's a scary
Congressman,
concept.
We have run out of time, but I got to ask, because the idea was supposedly put in the president's head by Richard Trumka, who is the AFL-CIO head. This was mid-November. The Wall Street Journal had an article saying that he had suggested the president. So did this idea actually come from the union chief, Trumka?
Sure sounds like it. And if you really want to talk about doing something for let's do regulatory reform. Let's regulate and control government's impact on small business. I go home to my wife, who's a small business person, and she reminds me every time I go home just exactly what a huge burden we're putting on the little guys who are actually creating a majority of jobs in this country.
Brian Bilbray, Republican from California. Good to see you, Congressman. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.